Now, there will be a talk on the important role of art historians, critics and curators in contemporary art by Professor Parul Mukherji. Parul Mukherji is a professor at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, India. She holds PhD from Oxford University and her publications span global art history, comparative aesthetics and contemporary Indian art. Her most recent publication is on 20th century art, co-edited with Professor Parthamiter and Rakhi Balram, published by Thames and Hudson 2021.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Priyamvada, for the introduction, and Ratnavali, whose work I've come to know while writing the book on 20th century Indian art. And it has been a very learning experience to write that book, because we really came across artists whose important role in the history of Indian art, contemporary and modern art, had kind of gone unrecognized. And in fact, it is thanks to my co-editor Rakhi Balram who drew my attention to Ratnavali's important contribution in the field, especially in the genre of performance art, about which very little is written. And I think our book recognizes a pioneering role in this field particularly. So thank you very much, and I'm very delighted to be here, to be invited to give this talk, and I'm very grateful to all of you to have come all the way here on a very hot afternoon. So it's a great pleasure for me to be talking to you. So what I've decided to do today, I'm going to talk about art writing today. What are its kind of trends? What is the direction it is moving towards? And I'm also going to bring in relationship of art writing with art practice. And I've chosen a very loaded, evocative title, Beyond Melancholia, Art Writing Today, and I'll explain to you in the course of my talk what exactly I mean by this. I hope I can go on to the next slide. What do I say? Yes?
Slide. Just right or left.
Just that one. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to start with this advertisement, which I found very interesting. A few years ago, I came across it. It's an Alan Solly advertisement, and it tells you about this young couple. And look at the caption. It says, "Waiting is so yesterday. I hate yesterday." And it continues. It says, "I hate everything that's yesterday, because today is what I wake up to. What is today is up to me, because I own it." It's a very, very loaded statement, and it tells you something about, the way in which the younger generation is thinking. Those who are part of the contemporary art scene, that there is so much of, a certain sense of apprehension of the past. It's as if, we don't have to deal with what had happened in the past. That legacy is too heavy, too much of a burden. Let's just focus about the present. And it also seems to go with this whole idea of, global modern, where the idea is to focus on what's happening today. You don't have to deal with the awkwardness of memory, the past, and so on. So to flag that, I have brought in this advertisement. You must be wondering, what is the connection between this advertisement and what I have to say about art writing? And I'm also going to talk about a certain kind of paradox, a contradiction that I see between art practice. Art practice, it's a very, very active scene. It's proliferating widely. There's so many different kinds of artists, different kinds of art practices. In contemporary art, it's very hard to theorize, because it's really about variety of interventions. So that's on one side. On the other hand, art writing. Look at the kind of books which are coming out from art institutions. Very often, art books which are promoted by private art galleries, where it's a particular kind of art writing, which is, of course, to do with documentation. They're also doing a lot of archival work. They're encouraging catalog writing. But
the focus is very much on the artists who are being promoted by those art galleries, right? So my question is, where is the scope for real critical writing? Criticality which can match up with the criticality of art practice. And this is what I mean by a paradox, or rather a gap between quality of art practice and quality of art writing. And I'm going to also flag this quotation from a very influential art critic, art historian, James Elkins, who's based in Chicago, and he's written a book on what happened to art criticism. It came out in around 2003. And he says that he actually flags a crisis in art writing. He says art criticism is in the throes of a worldwide crisis. It has become diaphanous, like a whale, floating in the breeze of cultural conversations, never quite settling anywhere. As if it's something which is, it comes and goes, it does not have any structure, it does not have any weight. And he says, in the last 3 or 4 decades, so keep in mind the last quarter of 20th century, critics have begun to avoid judgments altogether. You know, these days, it's very hard to come across critics who can, with boldness, make pronouncements saying that, this artist's work is successful here in this case, but maybe the works which he or she made in the last season were not all that good. You catch any art critic who would have that sense of conviction and boldness to make aesthetic judgment. It's very rare, especially in the field of contemporary art criticism. And then Elkins concludes, he says, this turn away from an engaged, passionate, historically informed practice is an amazing reversal, as astonishing as if physicists had declared that they would no longer try to understand the universe, but just appreciate it. So this is what is adding to the how do I say, sense of paradox which I just talked about. I'm also going to briefly signal writings on art, especially written by Geeta Kapoor. She's one of the preeminent art critics and curators. And she is the one, in one of the conferences that we are part of, she expressed the sense of melancholia over the loss of the historical. Remember that advertisement I showed you from Alan Solly, where there's a celebration of, oh, enough of the past, we are just on the present. We just would concentrate on what's happening in our time, in the now and in the present. So for critics who belong to the generation of Geeta Kapoor, this is really something which is creating a sense of crisis. Why are we turning our back away from history, from the past? Why this constant fixation on the perpetual present of the now? And that also explains, in the catalogue writing, the kind of genre of art writing which is proliferating in catalogue writing, there is again a fascination of this present, of the contemporary, where it's as if one is describing a slice of life well, but there is this reluctance to situate the artwork in a historical and critical framework. And that is what conventionally art critics were taught, that when you're looking at an artist's work, you also have to place it in the wider context to be able to appreciate the intervention made by the artist. And today I'm going to talk about 2 genres of art writing. One is, I would call, modernist genre, where artist is kept in the center, artist as author, where there's a lot of focus on biography of the artist, where art practice, of course, is given salience. And here I would give an example of this kind of an art writing. I'm sure most of you must be familiar with Kapoor's book on When Was Modernism, which came out in exactly 2000. And there's one very brilliant piece of writing on Nasreen Mohammadi, and it's called Elegy for an Unclaimed Beloved. It's a classic modernist kind of art writing where there's this kind of a biographical focus on the artist, Nasreen Mohammadi, and this certain kind of poetic way of talking about that art practice. So that's one genre, which was fairly influential, that genre of art writing. But more recently, there's some, how do I say, shift towards a kind of art writing where one can call it writing on art. That is, it really talks about this anthropological turn in art writing, where you have cultural critics like Susie Tharoor, Madhav Prasad, So they write about artists where the biography of the artist is not that important. But how do you place that artist's work within the larger, the cultural context of the time? And for example, let me just show you the work. Okay, before I come to the work, I have chosen Pushpamala's work. She's a Bangalore-based artist. She's also, she's embraced the genre of performance art, which is very different from Ratnabali's work. What Pushpamala does is, she, takes on different persona. She dresses up as different people, sometimes well-known people, and then she gets herself photographed by the artist. So it's called genre of photo performance. So Susie Tharoor, an art critic, when she writes about Pushpamala's famous series of works called Native Women in South India, she says that, let me show you the works. She says, when you have to write about artworks like this, it's a very different logic of representation. The artist is not just looking out, opening the window of the studio and observing what's happening in the world out there. No. She's dealing with ready-made images. She goes to the archives. She goes to the libraries. So she works with, in this case, colonial photographs, which have a long history. But what she does is, she interprets them, reinterprets them, by inserting her own persona in that history. So she dresses up as a Toda woman on the left, and she stands before this grid pattern, invoking the whole colonial violence. There was so much anthropocentric attitude towards human body, the body of the marginalized, the tribal, how they were measured, and they were treated like objects of research and not actual human beings. And that is something she's reenacting for us. So basically she's dealing with ideas, images which are already created by artists or photographers in the past. Look at this example. So that's what Susie Tharoor, who's written on Pushpamala, she says these artists like Pushpamala, they are dealing with citations, with like ready-made images. So these are not for the first time imagined by Pushpamala, but they are citations from Ravi Verma's paintings. And then she enacts, she takes the place of Lakshmi, the goddess, and she also has a collaborator, Claire Arney, the British collaborator with whom she has worked on this series. And this is, I'm sorry, I have, how do I go back if you can?
Left.
Yes.
Left arrow.
Is this working? Am I going back?
No, yeah.
So I may need the opposite. Is it going back?
Yes.
Yes, now it's working. Yeah. So this is Pushpamala's work again, where it's called The Portrait of a Mohammedan Woman. Again, it draws from an already established genre, and she of course places herself right in the middle of this figure that she invokes. And I just want to quote this line from Madhav Prasad's work. Remember, he's a cultural critic who is writing about art, and he says this work, it is the collective memory of a modern nation's urban citizenry, a memory embodied in images that the artist evokes through her work. Again, as I said, the artists are working with ready-made images. They are working with a certain kind of cultural legacy with which they are, they are intervening within. Now I'm going to turn to this large question. What happened to art criticism in India? Sometimes people say that, is there a decline of art criticism in the country? Very often people blame it on the rise of art theory. Like from 90s you have the post-colonial art theory, the rise of cultural criticism, cultural studies criticism. That's one question. The other question is it because this is the time when there is a rise of the curator? So the curator rises on the ashes of the critic. So the critic has to decline, the eminence of the critic has to, wane for the rise of this new figure called the curator. And a lot of people are very dissatisfied with this shift because they feel that the curators are calling the shots. Right? So very often even artists complain that when you read the curatorial brief, even the kind of wall text that you see on the walls of these art galleries, it's really about how the curator is thinking about the exhibition, and the voice of the artist sometimes get muffled, get marginalized. So which is why I often talk or think about the impact of cultural studies on art writing. So what is the kind of art writing which is emerging post-cultural studies? And so perhaps one way to understand the shift is, maybe the shift is from art writing. Remember the example that I gave you of Geeta Kapoor's writing on Nasreen Mohammadi? That's an example of art writing where art practice is absolutely stressed in the foreground, but the way in which Suzy Tharu or Madhav Prasad, they write about Pushpamala, it's writing on art. So art, the identity of the artist is not the central strand, it's one of the strands. It's not the central strand to be able to get an overall significance of that artwork. This creates a problem. You might ask me, why this shift where the primacy of the artist is slightly pushed to one side? And I would say that yes, there is a rise of a new model of art writing where two things are equally important. The question of aesthetics, the actual art practice, how is the artist dealing with materiality of paint, of sculpture, of photography, of new media art, but equally important is the question of ethics. What is the artist dealing with? What are the social issues that the artist is grappling with? How is the artist aligning herself or himself along with the society that he or she lives in? So this is what I think is creating a challenge for art writing. How art writing can accommodate both these things which seem to be pulling against each other. Sometimes you feel, oh, I can only do justice to aesthetics. But it's important that these two things have to be brought in conversation with each other. And therefore I brought in anthropology. How do we redefine art writing in the age of anthropology? Today, I think, according to me, that anthropology is one of the most important disciplines, especially in the age of globalization, where different cultures are coming together through technology, through travel, and it's very important for us to redefine art writing in such times. And therefore, of course, this question that I started with, this comfort with judgment, that do art critics or curators have this confidence to say, this artist got it right? Sorry, in this case, got it wrong. In fact, one of my favorite books, I'm sure some of you must have read it, is, it's called Failure and Success of Picasso by John Berger. Perhaps John Berger could write a book where, even while dealing with an artist like Pablo Picasso, one of the most celebrated artists of our time, he could talk about success and failure at the same time. And of course, anthropology teaches us that there are many criteria of judgment. We cannot have just one yardstick in a world which is so heterogeneous, especially in current times. And therefore, the question I would like to raise is the loss of judgment such a big loss? If it means that this field is expanding, we're dealing with different kinds of art practices. So maybe we should be introspective and say that, well, I can't just go on using this one yardstick which has been passed on, from the past. And most importantly, at least today, when we are living at a time where there's so much of inequality in the world, you know, it's made worse by globalization and so on, it's important to raise the question, how art writing opens space for the cultural others to be acknowledged. And I would like to conclude with this exhibition, which has recently took place at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, and it is called All Galleries Bear Watching, and it's curated by one of the young curators, Premjish Achari. And look at the artists that are part of the exhibition. So it's a mix of very established artists. So you have Dayanita Singh, you have artists like Mitu Sen, who are rubbing shoulders with artists who are absolutely unknown. So you have Ranjita Kumari, you have artists like, well, Sudhakar Odwe, now pretty well known, photographer from Bombay. And so it really offered a challenge to us in terms of how do you bring in the question of marginality. And look at the title, the theme that this curator has taken, All Canaries Bear Watching. What is a canary? Canary is a bird which is used or was used for mining. In mining industry, when you are exploring different mines, mines are full of these poisonous gases, so you have to make sure that it's okay for humans to pass through those spaces. Goes back to colonial times. They would carry these little birds, innocent birds, who are taken to those mines, and if the birds collapse because of the poisonous gases, then it's not safe for human beings to enter. So it's very poetic use of this bird, which also has a lot of ecological resonances, especially in the time when ecology has really come to the forefront. So these are the creative ways in which a curator deals with questions of politics of representation, but using poetics in a very powerful way. So I'm just showing you one of the works. This is by Ranjita Kumari. She is herself a Dalit artist. What she does is look at the materiality of practice. So she has collected saris from domestic workers, and out of that she has created this very fabulous collage of fabrics, and she calls it poetry of resistance. And this is another work. I think she also same artist who's collected these 250 pieces from the laborers. They use these pieces of cloth to carry weight on the heads. So these become very powerful visual means. So where ethics and aesthetics, as I said, they really come together. And I just told you about where this idea of canaries comes from, and this is what the curator tells us about how these miners were used, where they would carry the bird into the dark and dangerous pits, and the tiny bird is used by the miners to assess the quality of the air. If the conditions are deplorable, the toxic air of the mine will cause the fragile lungs of the canary to fail. The canary is sacrificed for the benefit of the miners. And since we lived in the times of the pandemic, I think this metaphor becomes even more powerful to understand how a curator uses this symbol. So I think I've already said it enough. I'm going to conclude with Mitu Sen, who was also in the same exhibition. Her critical use of language. She's one artist she's also a poet, and she also uses language in a very critical sense. And this is just a slide from her recent work where she comes up with the idea of some kind of anti-language. And so I don't think using language is a prerogative only of critics and curators, but that's also a meeting point between the critics and curators and the artist. So on this I'm going to conclude, and thank you very much for your attention.
If anybody has any questions, please ask. কিছু জিজ্ঞেস করার থাকলে yes, sliding শুরু করে. Yes. lovely, wonderful to hear you, Parul. Very enlightening and very engaging. And I just had one thought in my mind. You mentioned the narrowing down of the critical space. Would you point your finger towards media as well? Don't you think the media has deprived art of a legitimate space within the social context and social...
Thank you for raising that. And I think media had also been there earlier. I mean, media is part of the modernist experience, right? By media, I would just not mean just television, internet. Of course, that gives a different dimension to the media. But the technology of printing, print culture. So that has been there. But I think where there is a second
in a
point.
very big way, in fact.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
Richard Bartholomew and all.
Exactly, that's what I meant by modernist genre of art criticism, where Richard Bartholomew will not mince words. He would have the, what do I say, the gumption to say that Krishna Khanna's work here, it's brilliantly done, but it will not stop him from saying that in the next exhibition, if he's not happy with what the artist has done, he would declare, saying that sorry, he's failed. And that's what I mean by saying that this whole idea of critics' ability to pass on value judgment is something which is frowned upon today. Also because I think ethnographic turn, the importance of anthropology, the impact of globalization, yes, impact of media, the whole dynamics of media has changed. It's just not print technology, but media in a large sense, television, internet, and so on. And the curator also becomes important because when a curator is, now very mobile, traveling different parts of the world, dealing with artists who are coming from different cultural contexts. So it is that one curator who is able to connect with all those different artists and is able to give us certain conceptual tools within which to place diversity of art practice. I think that's also one of the reasons why curator is really shot into prominence. Because that person, he or she, can actually give you clues as to how do you deal with different languages of art, different use of technology, aesthetics, ethics, and so on. Yeah. Thank you for raising that question.
I noticed that social media has broken barriers, gone beyond borders, but not in the area of art. It has not brought into the interiors of Indian art practicing world the rest of the art practices. Likewise, not vice versa either.
I think media has impacted phenomenally, also in terms of Indian artists' visibility to the world outside. I think now they have a certain kind of art. I mean, even art market has picked up, to a large extent, and so that I think that has changed a great deal to the advantage of the artist, definitely. But yes, in India, I think internet is not, equally available to everybody, not in rural areas where the question of connectivity is a problem. So it has created its own sets of hierarchies, which we have to accept.
Just I want to say a few lines. Writing history on a contemporary artist is especially difficult if the artist is alive. You cannot avoid interviewing and talking to the artist. Writing history with wrong information is inappropriate, as it can ruin the career of artist as well as historian. Because in this age of internet and social media, where nothing can be hidden, the truth will be revealed. So contemporary art historians have a lot of responsibilities too. This much. And now we will Thank you, Parul. Thank you very
You won't
much.
let me respond to that
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah. But you have to have not only you, it's the
No, I just
this
want, I mean,
generation.
it's too much of a provocation, so I have to take your challenge.
Yes.
And I would like to say that, you know, today, if you're really talking about the shift from modern to contemporary, I think, in a sense, why the field has become so heterogeneous is also because the authority of the artist has also been decentered. And I'm very much on the side of that. Because once the focus from the artist, you know, slightly shifts to the world, there are so many different kinds of meanings which are available, which even you might not have been aware of at the time of
Now
art
we'll
making.
talk about in another meeting.
So you've opened up a very large question.
Thank you, Parul. Thank you very much.